Hey, que la que hay, mi amigo? Rocky here from SpeakSpanishFaster.com. Now, you know of Wagner Moura, right? He's the guy that played Pablo Escobar in the hit show Narcos that was on Netflix. Narcos is one of my favorite shows. But I was shocked to find out that Wagner Moura, the guy that played the Pablo Escobar, didn't even know Spanish before the show. So he literally learned Spanish within a few months before the show. You see, when he first got cast to play Pablo, he thought that he was going to be speaking English in a Spanish accent. So think Al Pacino and Scarface. Do you want to play rough? Okay. Say hello to my little friend. Seriously, even though he was born in South America, he didn't know a lick of Spanish. So you could probably imagine how shocked he was when the director of the movie called him up and was like, "Hey, Wagner, I want to let you know, a little change of plans. We're going to be casting your role in Spanish. So instead of speaking English with a Spanish accent, you'll just be speaking Spanish. You're from South America, right? You know Spanish." Well, there was a big problem. Even though Wagner Moura is from South America, he's actually from Brazil, the only country in South America that speaks Portuguese, not Spanish. So Portuguese was his native language. He spoke English, but he didn't speak Spanish. So what did Wagner decide to do? He decided to book a flight, moved his life from where he was at in Brazil to Medellin, Colombia. He wanted to fully immerse himself not only in Spanish, but in Pablo Escobar's world, in Pablo's hometown of Medellin, Colombia. So he moved all his stuff to Colombia. He stayed there before the show, and he ended up speaking Spanish the entire show. Now, he did receive some criticism for the show because his accent wasn't 100% paisa, what they call it, the Colombian Spanish. So a few Colombians, not a few Colombians, but the majority of Colombia was mad because here you have another show portraying the bad history of Medellin, Colombia. It's changed a lot today. I'm sure there's still drug dealing and stuff going on. But for the most part, Medellin has changed a lot compared to what it used to be. And the people don't want that negative connotation on their country, let alone by somebody that's not even Colombian, somebody that's from another country coming in their country, doesn't even speak their language perfectly. And yeah, so he did receive some criticism. But overall, as you probably know, Narcos was a hit here in the States and throughout the majority of the rest of the world. And yeah, Wagner went on to play Pablo for a few seasons before he was killed off in the show, just like the real Pablo Escobar. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because I have some tips, some takeaways that you can use that can help you learn Spanish like Wagner did, all right? So I want to give you a few tips that I pretty much took from watching interviews, doing some research on how Wagner Moura learned Spanish to play the Pablo Escobar. I still find it crazy to this day that you have a figure as polarizing as Pablo being played by somebody that didn't even speak Pablo's native language. But he played an amazing Pablo in Narcos, and honestly, once he was out off the show, I didn't even really watch anymore. I haven't even watched the new season, the Narcos in Mexico version. But with all that being said, what can you kind of take away from what Wagner did to learn Spanish? How can you implement it into your Spanish training regimen so that you can start speaking Spanish the way that you want? So my first tip is pretty much the low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's to immerse yourself as much as possible. Now, obviously, we all don't have the funds and the ability to pick ourselves up and move ourselves to another country. We haven't been cast to play the lead Pablo Escobar in a Netflix series. All right, so we all can't just pick up and move to a Spanish-speaking country. But what we can do is try to immerse ourselves as much as possible. And by immersing ourselves, I don't just mean listening to Spanish music. That is going to help, but listening to more Spanish music, try to listen to nothing but Spanish music. Try turning your phone to Spanish. Try watching nothing but Spanish TV or having nothing but Spanish channels. Try conversing with the majority of only Spanish people so that English, obviously if you're in the United States, you're always going to be using English, but try to make Spanish more important in your life. Try to bring it to the forefront of your life and try to do anything and everything that requires you to think and use the Spanish language. My next tip is to focus on pronunciation while you're working on literacy. I think this is the biggest problem with the Spanish that they teach in schools or that they teach on some of the language apps is that, yeah, they teach us all these different words, all these different vocabulary words and all the grammar and all that stuff, but they kind of breeze over how to actually say the word properly. And this really affects not only your ability to speak Spanish, but your ability to understand when natives speak it to you. Here's why. Let's say you've been practicing a word, you didn't know how to say it right, you've flew through the vocabulary words in your Spanish class or with the app, you click the button, boom, yeah, you learn the word, but you don't really know how to say it. So let's take a basic word, and it's hola, hola. But let's just say you're just used to saying hola, hola, or hola, 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 hola. And let's just say you just don't have that natural accent and you don't know how to properly pronounce the word. So not only are you going to sound like a gringo when you speak, but also when it's time for a native to speak to you in Spanish, it's going to be difficult to understand because in your mind, you've kind of said that word is hola, hola. So then if somebody comes up to you like, hola, ¿cómo estás? Then it's kind of different. That's a basic example. But when we start getting into more difficult words and you recognize the word as being said this way because that's how you keep saying it in your head, and then a Spanish speaker says that same word the proper way, but a different way than which you have been practicing, then it's going to make it very difficult to understand it. Not to mention when Spanish people speed up the language and they cut some of the words, then it becomes very, very difficult. So don't only focus on literacy. That's important. I'm not saying stop learning vocab or stop learning grammar or stop trying to read, but you also need to be working on your pronunciation of the words and really make sure you master that pronunciation and you are saying the words right. Think about when we have a kid or when we're growing up and the kid is trying to say ba. I have a little godson. He's like 2 now and he's still trying to talk. And he'll say ba for ball. And we say like, he's like ba, like ball. And we're trying to tell him the right way to say it. But in Spanish, when we're learning in school, it's like the teacher doesn't really make us, they don't stick with us. They don't say bola, bola, bola. If we're just like bola, bola, they don't say no, bola, bola, bola. Like they don't really integrate that into our brain that we're saying it wrong. They just say, okay, you got it, move to the next one. Oh, did you memorize it? This is how you spell it. And we really forget about the pronunciation, and it really affects our ability to speak and comprehend Spanish. So again, focus on pronunciation while you're focusing on your literacy. Now the next tip kind of ties into the first tip on trying to fully immerse yourself, and that is really seriously try to talk with more Spanish people, especially people that don't even know English well. One of the best ways to do this is, honestly, you can either help out with like a English speaking class where there are, English teachers that kind of ESL where they're teaching English to Spanish speakers. The reason why is because it's going to force you to learn Spanish, and it's going to force you to use the language. That's why it was so easy for Wagner. Not going to say it was easy, but that's why it's easier when you move to a Spanish-speaking country. It's not that when you move to a Spanish-speaking country, there's this magic power that you automatically learn Spanish. What happens is you are forced to use nothing but Spanish. And I'm reminded of this anytime I go to like Colombia. I've been to Colombia a few times. I used to live in the Dominican Republic in Santiago. And it's so different. Even when I recently went to Spain, it's like, even when you know Spanish and you're living in the States, you're not used to just everything being in Spanish. You're not used to only interacting in Spanish. It's like you go to the store and guess what? Everything's in Spanish. You go to the restaurant, all the food's in Spanish. All the conversation around you is in Spanish. That's why it's easier to learn Spanish when you move to a different country. It's not because there's some magic power or anything when you move to those countries. And the reason why this really affects you is because it forces you to think everything in Spanish. For example, if I'm in the States, let's say I'm talking to one of my friends, and I have a bad habit of using Spanglish. So let's say I say something like, hey, mi amigo, yo voy para allá como a las 3. Yeah, the store, right there en la esquina, ahí mismo. So I kind of mix the language. Yeah, I'm going there at 3 o'clock. Yeah, the store, right there on the corner. But I have this tendency to mix Spanish and English very often. That's just kind of how I grew up. My dad's from New York City, from the Bronx, and he's Puerto Rican. So learning, in New York, there's a lot of that Spanglish going on. And it's just something that I kind of grew up listening to from my grandma, everybody. So that's kind of, when you're in a Spanish-speaking country or you're only talking to somebody Spanish, I can't fall back on that. I'm forced to speak in every word in Spanish. I can't, sometimes I get lazy and I just say the word in English if I don't feel like thinking about it in Spanish, or it's just a habit. But when you are forced to only think and speak in Spanish, then it changes things. It forces your mind to work, and it helps you learn Spanish faster, because I think it kind of ties into our brains and that type of survival mechanism. Now, I'm not saying this is 100% true. I'm not a scientist or anything, but my theory is what happens is when you go to a Spanish-speaking country, it's like your brain focuses better, because it's like, okay, if I want to survive here, I have to speak what these people are speaking. So let me dial it in. Let me focus more. So really make it a habit of making more Spanish friends, especially friends that only speak Spanish. And I think it will really help you with your Spanish practice. Now, the next tip that I'm going to give you is to focus on the key words that you need now, the specific words that you need now. This is another problem in school. I know they want to teach us a lot of vocabulary. And look, I have nothing against school. I actually graduated with a degree in Spanish from college. So I'm not here just to bash school because I didn't, go to school, or I didn't graduate, or I didn't want to take Spanish in school. Like, I love Spanish. I took it all throughout middle school, high school. Even though I speak Spanish, I took it all through middle school, high school, college, and I graduated with a degree in Spanish. So again, I'm not just here to bash on school Spanish, but I think I can view it from a different lens than a lot of people. And another one of the problems I see is that early in Spanish, it's like we're learning all these words that we don't necessarily need. Yes, we learn the basic conversation, but then we might learn, okay, here's these words for this topic, and here's these words for this topic. So the thing with Wagner was he knew that for playing the role of Pablo, he was going to need certain words, the majority being street words. Now, I think in school, we don't learn a lot of street words, right? We don't learn a lot of words that people are saying on the streets. We learn more like, okay, basic, hola, ¿cómo estás? And all that stuff. And then we learn, oh, this is doctor, and this is this, and this is different foods, and here's traveling, and a lot of things that are important. But Wagner knew for this movie, he needed to know about drugs, and he needed to know about this. So if you're learning Spanish to travel, focus on traveling. If you're on travel words, I should say. If you're learning Spanish so that you can converse with the cook at your job, well, learn some of the words that you might be saying to the cook at the job. Really dial it in, and then start really narrow, and then broaden out, like widen out your range. So don't just start like boom, here, there. No, instead dial it in, focus on a few, maybe one topic that you really need. Okay, of course, basic conversation, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo te llamas? All that stuff we need to know. But then think about some things that you might need on the streets. Or let's say, okay, I'm going to a Spanish restaurant. What will I need to know? Okay, maybe el baño. ¿Dónde está el baño? Tienen postre, like dessert. Arroz, habichuelas, pollo. Think about different terms that you will need for that specific situation. If you only need to know Spanish to converse with the waiter at a restaurant, then you don't need to be learning about all these other words over here. You master these words, and then it's like, okay, now I can broaden out. So remember that, dial it in, and then widen your range. My last tip is to try to find somebody to emulate. This is one of my favorite things to tell some of our students, especially when you know there's a certain accent or type of Spanish that you want to speak. And first off, I recommend everybody that's trying to learn Spanish, and this is never done, it's rarely ever done. Well, they don't teach you this in school or anything, is to try to find somebody that you like in Spanish. So for Wagner, he had to follow Pablo Escobar. He had to watch his probably interviews. He had to watch documentaries, and he had to really listen to how he talked, learn his mannerisms and things of that nature. So I highly recommend find a Spanish that you want to learn, like a particular type of Spanish, as either you're a Spanish speaker or aspiring Spanish speaker. You know, all countries have different Spanish. So find the Spanish you want to speak. And the best way to find this, or the best way to learn this, I would say the best thing to do is either pick a country that you frequent a lot. Like for me, I'm usually in Puerto Rico because my family's there. So it wouldn't make sense for me. Let's say I didn't even speak Spanish and I want to learn Spanish. It wouldn't make sense for me to learn how to talk like somebody in Madrid if I'm only going to Puerto Rico a lot, right? I should be learning how they speak and their terms and their accents. So not only do I want to sound like them, but so I can understand them better. So find a country that, let's say if you always go to the Dominican Republic or you always go to Spain, then really try to dial it in. If you know, oh, I'm going to take this travel abroad, the study abroad class in a certain country. Well, learn that country's Spanish. So that way when you get there, you already know some terms, you already know some things. I did the same thing when I went to the Dominican Republic. Even though I already spoke Spanish, I know in the Dominican Republic, they speak different than I did. They had different words, different terms that I learned some before I got there, and then I learned more as I, made friends and stuff. So you want to really focus in on the type of Spanish that you're going to be speaking or that you're going to be using. And let's say you live in this place like Miami where there's a lot of like Cubans or Venezuelans and stuff, then you probably want to learn their types of Spanish. Or let's say you're in New York and you're surrounded by a lot of Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, then you probably want to learn that type of Spanish. So really the type of Spanish you should want to learn is based on what Spanish are you going to interact with most. Last example, if you're in Texas, you'll probably want to learn Mexican Spanish because there's a lot of Mexicans there. So try to learn the Spanish that you are going to be interacting with most. And the best way to do this is find one person that you like. I usually recommend finding like a Spanish artist. So for example, let's say if I want to speak Puerto Rican Spanish, then I'll find, one of these Puerto Rican rappers that have been blowing up. Let's say someone like my favorite is like Anuel or Ozuna. I'll find one of them. Ozuna's actually Dominican, but he grew up in Puerto Rico. He actually has a Puerto Rican accent. But let's just say Bad Bunny. He's probably the most famous one right now. He's from Puerto Rico. All his music is Puerto Rican, so he has a strong Puerto Rican accent. I would watch all the interviews with him. Anything I could watch and learn, how does he talk? What's his rhythm? How does he say certain words? How fast does he speak? What are some of his mannerisms? Just how Wagner Moura had to copy Pablo Escobar. I would do the same with somebody like Bad Bunny if I wanted to learn Puerto Rican Spanish, right? So find somebody, let's say, find somebody that's maybe not similar to you, but I think it's easier if you do find somebody that, if you're a man, find a male. If you're a female, find a female. So if you're going to Colombia and you want to speak Colombian Spanish, then, watch a lot of Shakira interviews and watch how she talks in Spanish and learn some of the words she says and the accent that she uses, because this is going to familiarize yourself with the language. It's going to help you learn that Colombian Spanish to speak it and as well understand it. So the final tip I'll get into is that you have to want to master the language. Again, Wagner Moura, he had to want to learn the language because he had a whole role on the line. Again, the stakes aren't that high for all of us, but if you really want to learn Spanish, you have to put yourself out there. You have to really focus and you have to want to do it. You have to put in the time, put in the effort that it takes to really master a language. Like, it's just with anything. If we want to get better at something, we have to practice it. We have to make it a priority. The more hours you put in, the better you are going to be at it, especially if you're using training that works and training that is going to help you improve your Spanish. And of course, that leads to a perfect slight little pitch for some of our training programs. The only reason I'm so confident in them is because they've helped a lot of students just like you speak Spanish faster. Of course, you could go to our website, speakspanishfaster.com, and there you will find our best training course that can help you learn Spanish. And of course, I'm always going to keep doing these free YouTube videos for you as well. But if you want to take things to the next level and you want to learn pretty much my method of helping students learn Spanish, then you can go to my website. I'll put the link in the comments for you. But thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope it resonates with you. And I hope if there's just one takeaway, one thing that clicked for you and you can say, oh, I'm going to try that. If there's just one of those things, one of those bells went off in your head, then I did my job today. I hope you enjoyed it.